television picture.
While the BBC were busying themselves broadcasting plays about men with foliage in their mouths, there was another broadcaster with a much clearer agenda.
Heil Hitler!
The Nazis were quick to realise the potential of television and became the world's first public service broadcaster. And to make sure everyone got the message, Nazi TV helpfully installed the hugely expensive set in community centres. With the uplifting material, it was like daytime television now, only with Kilroy replaced by Hitler. The Nazis were the first, but by no means the last, to try and use the television as a tool to manipulate the masses. Back in Blighty, where there were masses just longing to be manipulated, the BBC finally decided it was time to get serious. The trouble was there were two systems, Baird's and Marconi's, and as is the way with the Beeb, they went for both. Here at Alexandra Palace in London, they built two studios. To my right, one for the bantamweight Baird with his mechanical system, and to my left, one for the heavyweight corporation, Marconi EMI, with its Farnsworth-style electronic system. And they took it in turns to broadcast. 1 week Baird, 1 week Marconi EMI. And then, after 6 months, whoever offered the best service would win the airwaves of Britain. So, on November the 2nd, 1936, BBC Television was born. They even wrote a special song to celebrate the new arrival.
Conjured up in sound and sight by the magic rays of light.
Now, with such gems as the UK's worst toilets, you could be forgiven for thinking that modern TV has gone down the pan. But trust me on this, it hasn't. It used to be much, much worse.
Yes, I'm quite well, thank you.
The 1930s was not TV's golden era.
I have not come here to be made a laughingstock. No, repeat, please.
This is a carving by the young English sculptor Henry Moore.
I imagine that you could find your way alone in the dark. Yes, I can.
But even if tap dancing and people in fezzes were your bag and you decided to buy a TV, it wasn't easy.
So the poor old viewer went into a big department store like Selfridges and said, I want to buy a television set. And the sales assistant would say, certainly, do you want an EMI system or do you want to buy a Baird system? And if you made the wrong choice, 6 months down the line, you were left with a worthless piece of junk.
Nonetheless, the competition was underway, with an early lead for Marconi EMI, whose picture quality was generally considered superior. And then, disaster. As Baird struggled to match Marconi's quality, his labs in the Crystal Palace were burnt down.
The derelict shambles resembles nothing on earth, least of all the old Crystal Palace.
Baird's TV system and his dreams went up in smoke. The fire was the end for Baird. And the BBC never even bothered waiting for the end of the competition. They simply handed the airwaves to Marconi EMI. Baird was devastated, as of course were all the people who'd wasted such a vast amount of money buying one of his television sets.
Now, cameras, please. Here are the instructions. We're using all three of you in this scene.
But people who'd bought the Marconi EMI system didn't fare well either. Because no sooner had the BBC started to develop their new thing, it was brought to a grinding halt by the start of the Second World War. Afraid that enemy bombers might use the TV signal to guide them, the BBC stopped transmitting. For 5 years, there truly was nothing to watch on television.
August 8th, 1940, and the battle for Britain is on.
30 enemy aircraft over the channel, flying due west.
However, little did the Luftwaffe know that they would soon be defeated by television. Picture the scene. It's 1940, and pretty well every day, wave after wave of German bombers are flying over this very stretch of Sussex coastline. Now, we were outnumbered and outgunned. We should have lost, but we had one critical advantage. Thanks to the new invention of radar, we could see them coming. Radar wouldn't have been possible without one vital ingredient taken directly from television, the cathode ray tube. Suddenly, scientists didn't need to listen to confusing radar signals. They had a screen on which they could actually see the incoming aircraft.
Here comes the Luftwaffe. In dozens of flights, hundreds of planes.
In the Battle of Britain, it armed our forces with the exact position and distance of the enemy and helped win the most decisive air battle of the war. If it wasn't for radar, this program would probably be in German. So, in 1940, television didn't change the world. It did something much more important. It stopped the world being changed.
Hello, everybody. This is the BBC television station at Alexandra Palace.
When the war was over, which incidentally we won, television really took off, and 20,000 sets were sold in the UK in the first year. The sets were cheaper and better, and the rebirth of programming was perfectly timed.
Mix on new camera 1.
It brought some light relief to the doom and gloom of post-war depression. But while television was back and booming, the same couldn't be said of its inventors. John Logie Baird died a broken man. For 23 years, he'd nursed his invention, bringing the world the first television pictures, the first TV presenter, even the first transatlantic broadcast. But Baird's system was fatally flawed. Mechanical TV was never going to change the world. In America, Farnsworth watched helpless as the mega corporation RCA claimed his invention as their own, broadcasting to the masses and getting all the glory. Deeply embittered, he gave up on television and turned his brilliant mind to nuclear fusion, until drinking got the better of him.
He didn't know when to stop.
An overactive mind that never slept. He'd have at night, sometimes he'd have to have something to put him to sleep. He started taking a glass of wine, and then he'd have 1 or 2 glasses later on. It's not a thing that we especially are proud of to say, but the thing that took him in the end was alcohol.
It was a sad ending for the American genius who took his inspiration from the land and invented what you and I call television. You know, I've worked in television for 15 years, but I still have no idea how the actual set works. I recognise that these are speakers and that they have an important job to do, and I presume all this has something to do with electricity. But how that electricity gets down this bit, which is the cathode ray tube, and then makes a picture on the screen, I'm completely clueless. It's more unfathomable than an internal combustion engine. And to think it was all dreamed up by a 14-year-old boy. Farnsworth died sad and disillusioned. He was buried in this graveyard in Provo, Utah. But his spirit lives on, and these bikers from Salt Lake City who all work in television are named after the man who invented it. They're called Philo's Angels.
We're very interested in Philo T. Farnsworth because he's, as the inventor of TV, he created a business and whole industry that we're all involved in. We all love it. We have a great time working on it. It's fantastic. And if it wasn't for Philo T. Farnsworth, I'd probably still be a bartender.
Television changed the world for most people because they got to see things they never would have seen before, like London, England, Paris, France,